Some things are impossible for the mind to hold alone. So listen, if you can, with your whole being.
Carolina De Robertis is a Uruguayan-American author. Her first book, Invisible Mountain, won critical acclaim. She is currently promoting her latest novel, Perla, which delves into the murky past of the Argentine military dictatorship of the 1970s and 80s, in which an estimated 30,000 people disappeared.
My grandmother was a poet, an Argentinian poet. She died when I was 7 years old, but just knowing about her existence was an incredible source of inspiration for me as a child and then later as a young adult, as I attempted to gather the courage to try to write something of my own. In my novel, Perla, I explore the intimate, long-term aftermath of the disappearances in Argentina. So not only the trials and the kind of external attempts at justice that we can see in newspaper headlines, but the way that a social phenomenon like a dictatorship that violates the human rights of its own people affects people's daily lives. Disappeared people who had been kidnapped and tortured by their government, innocent citizens, were thrown from airplanes naked and alive and to meet their death. And this had been a secret until the 1990s. When I learned about this history, it became a fascination for me that these bodies were lost into the river between Argentina and Uruguay. Of the 30,000 people who disappeared under the Argentinian dictatorship, it's estimated that about 500 of them were pregnant women who were also tortured, who gave birth in captivity, and then were killed while their babies were taken and illegally, secretly adopted into families where they would never learn their identity. Most of the adopting families were members of the regime themselves.
How do you make sense of that kind of human brutality?
One of the hardest parts of dealing with the reality of atrocity is grappling with the fact that the people who perpetrate these terrible crimes are human beings. It's a very difficult thing for us to accept. I spent the beginning of my adulthood working as a rape counselor, and during that time, one of the things I heard from my clients was their amazement. Often, the people who had sexually assaulted them were human beings, people whose good side they had seen. I think that that's a different example that kind of brings and sheds light on the fact that if we're to truly move beyond violence as a society, and on a global level, we need to have some room to be able to acknowledge the full humanity of perpetrators of terrible crimes without excusing those crimes.